Hello and welcome to Direct Communication for Difficult Conversations, a webinar for VISTA sponsors and leaders. Despite differences in their roles, sponsors, supervisors, and leaders are all likely to encounter conflict or issues with their members that may need to be addressed. This webinar offers strategies for direct communication that can help you to navigate difficult topics. I'm your host, Andy King, a senior training specialist with AmeriCorps Vista. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you our presenter, Lisa Reitmeyer. Lisa is a writer and educator based in Portland, Oregon, who partners with nonprofits as a trainer, consultant, and writer. Lisa is no stranger to national service, having served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso and as an AmeriCorps member with Teachers College at Columbia University, where she graduated with a master's in education. Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Andy. I'm really glad to be here to talk with all of you VISTA sponsors and leaders about the confidence one needs to enter into difficult conversations. Difficult conversations can be ones we tend to avoid, but when we have the right skills, we can confidently move toward the resolution, knowing that all relationships, even healthy ones, have conflict. Let's take a look at what I hope we'll get out of our time together. We'll start by defining what makes a conversation difficult. Next, I'll share 5 strategies that you can take from this presentation and start using in your conversations with colleagues, members, and others, so you can turn a difficult conversation into its more mature friend, the direct conversation. Finally, we'll have a chance to listen to what direct conversations, those that use the 5 strategies we learned today, sound like. You'll gain insights from these examples to help you apply them to real-life situations in your sponsor or leader role. But before we get started, I'd like to hear from you. Andy will explain.
All right, so we want to use the chat feature for this discussion interaction. And again, if you don't have the chat open, select that speech bubble icon that you see at the bottom of your screen. And now we'd like you to think of a difficult conversation that you've had in the past. And answer in the chat, what made it challenging? So think about what was it like before, during, and after the conversation, and think about what emotions, if any, were involved. And once you've written your response, be sure you send it to everyone. This could be a conversation in general. Doesn't have to be service related. It could be any difficult or challenging conversation that you've had. All right, well, we have a lot of responses coming in. Several of you have talked about your degree of comfort that you have with conflict or addressing a challenging topic or difficult conversation. Some of you want to preserve the relationship. You don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or you don't want to make things weird. You want to kind of preserve your relationships. Others of you, have noted that, maybe the thing that's making the conversation challenging is someone's not being completely honest with you, and so you're trying to sift through what's true and what's not, and then how to perhaps address that in a conversation. Others of you have talked about, acknowledging that there are different points of view on topics, and in some cases that can be okay. So Lots of great responses here. I can't go through them all, but keep them coming if you haven't had a chance to submit yours yet. And with that, Lisa, I'm going to turn and see what stood out for you.
Lots of great comments, and I think a lot of us can relate to these. One thing I noticed that keeps coming up is not knowing what to say. And that's something this presentation will directly address, some tips and tricks for how to begin, continue, and then end a conversation. Another point I saw was not knowing whether the conversation, quote unquote, worked, whether you were able to get your point across and determine whether or not the conversation had been successful. And that's something else we're going to cover today, is a way to help you know whether or not the conversation, whether or not it was the point that you were trying to make was communicated well. So hopefully this presentation will touch on lots of these, but in general, yes, I think these responses show us that this is a topic a lot of us think about, but don't necessarily have the confidence in doing well. And it's not really something that's taught to us a lot of times. So it's helpful just to take a step back and think about something like this in this setting. Okay, so we'll go deeper into what makes a conversation difficult. Seth Godin is a writer and a teacher I admire. He defines difficult conversations as conversations that occur when we want more than one thing. We want someone to stop doing something and not be mad at us, for example. Or we want a person to change their behavior and still be our friend. Or we want someone to change their output but continue to like and respect us. If we have authority over someone and we don't care what the person thinks of us, we don't consider it difficult. Think a TSA agent telling us to stand in a different line at the airport. They have the authority to tell us to do that, and they don't care if we like them. But if either you don't have authority or you care what the other person thinks, then it can become difficult. So now that we know what makes some conversations difficult, let's look at how we can approach them. If we find ourselves in a situation where we must discuss difficult topics, it helps if the conversation is direct. So how do we move from having difficult conversations to having direct conversations? Let's go over some strategies. Seth Godin's blog post entitled "Difficult Conversations at Work" is a good place to start. It's not very long, so I'll go ahead and read it out loud. You'll see some important phrases pop up on the screen as I read. Seth says, when the outcome of a conversation is in doubt, don't do it by email, and show up in person if you can. The synchronicity of face-to-face conversation gives you the chance to change your tone in midstream. Be curious, ask questions. A great question is usually better than a good answer. And don't forget, the value of a long pause is difficult to overstate. So there you have it, our first 4 strategies when it comes to direct communication. Do not have difficult conversations via email. Instead, have them face-to-face. Consider your tone of voice. Be curious by asking questions, and embrace the long pause. So let's look at these a bit more in depth. These days, Zoom counts as face-to-face. It's not ideal, but it's still better than the telephone alone, and certainly better than email or text message. Face-to-face interactions help us adjust to a conversation with our voice and our body language. Looking people in the eye is important, and an online video conference tool makes that possible. It also signals that the topic is serious and deserving of everyone's time. The small talk that typically begins a face-to-face interaction is also an opportunity to make a genuine connection beforehand. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Burkina Faso, every conversation, casual or formal, opened with a series of questions. How are you? How is your family? How is your health? How is your family's health? And these were not merely conversational bridges. They were sincere inquiries into a person's well-being, and they taught me something valuable about human interaction. People have a lot going on in their lives, and whatever topic you've got in mind might not be the most important or pressing issue to them. So it's important to keep things in perspective. Sincerely reaching out can go a long way because it can put people at ease and make a connection on a personal level. How was your weekend? Or even a less personal question about the weather or current events where the person is located work too. These interactions are typical in person, less common over the telephone, and nearly impossible with email. Do not underestimate them. Human decency and connection go a long way. Most of us don't like conflict, but conflict is normal, healthy, and handled well, it's even an opportunity. One of the worst things we can do with conflict is pretend it's not there. In direct conversations, a person moves right toward the conflict. Being curious helps us learn more about the conflict in order to be able to come to a reasonable solution together. The best way to be curious is to ask open-ended questions and then wait for a response. Phrases like "really?" or "how so?" are examples of how you can bring your curiosity to the table. "Tell me more," and "how can I help?" also work. Chances are, if you enter a conversation thinking you know exactly how it should end, you're not being curious enough. You might need to learn something to come up with a solution that will work. Your assumptions might be wrong. Curiosity requires humility, an acknowledgement that you might not have it all figured out and that the solution is still negotiable and discoverable. Good leaders are curious and believe that the people on their team bring real knowledge and ideas to the table. Good leaders listen. Now, I'm curious if you have thoughts on how to use curiosity. Andy?
Thanks, Lisa. So we have another activity where we'll use the chat to gather your ideas. This time there are 2 questions, and you can answer either one. So the first is, what are some other questions that you could ask in a conversation? And the other one, what are some other ways that you can be curious? Again, we'll put on some music while you respond. All right, so I see some great questions in here, as well as some other strategies that are not themselves questions. Some of the questions are kind of fall into the category of tell me more. And some others talked about, using some active listening techniques where you repeat back what you think you heard to get some clarification. Others talked about offering the person some options, like, to help them maybe clarify what it is they're looking for. Are you looking for solutions or venting or something else? And several of you offered different options of that. And then others had talked about some things that, beyond asking questions, but being able to think about how you can use your body language and listening and facial expressions to really kind of communicate your curiosity and your openness. So those are a few things that I noticed there. Lisa, want to see if you had some other thoughts about ways folks can be curious.
These are so good. I encourage everyone to jot them down on a piece of paper and keep them above your workstation. Just such good ideas, and several of the things that come up, like dealing with defensiveness and adjusting your tone. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. All of those things are also things we're going to cover as we continue on in the session. So some great additions to the Be Curious strategy. And as we move on, I wanted to say one more thing about how we ask these questions. It's one thing to know what you want to ask and say, but equally important how you ask it. So with a question like really, there's a way to ask it that sounds sarcastic and demeaning, and there's a way to say it with sincerity and openness. So with the right tone, you'll have a better chance of engaging someone in a purposeful conversation. A serious but friendly tone isn't easy to master, but that's the goal. So how do we manage the emotions that might arise? Emotions like anger, fear, or frustration during these conversations? There are strategies that might work for some of us, but not all of us. Taking deep breaths, for example. Others use humor to help reduce tension. Others might doodle in a notebook during a conversation. Think about what calms you down. Ask yourself how you prepare for other things in your life that you might be nervous about or dread, like going to the dentist. The strategies you employ in those scenarios can help you consider what might work for you during difficult and direct conversations. So find what works for you. Once during a performance review, I had a boss tell me that he always knew, as did everyone else in the room, when I didn't like an idea being presented in a meeting because I rolled my eyes. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know I was doing this. I was so embarrassed to find out I had been rolling my eyes in a work
I'm not
meeting.
allowed to be frivolous.
Oh, sorry. I think my speaker notes were speaking at me. So I just felt humiliated when he told me this. And my boss told me that he appreciated knowing what I thought. He just wished I expressed it in another way. So using my voice, for example, instead of rolling my eyes. He wanted to know what I thought, but I had to figure out how to form those initial impressions that caused me to roll my eyes into a useful, productive sentence. So our body language sets a tone, much like the tone of our voice. And when our emotions are running high, it's difficult to keep these things in check. If a conversation begins and you feel your voice or your body temperature rise or your heartbeat increase, you can end the conversation. You could say something like, I'm so sorry to do this, but I really need to have this conversation at a different time. Is there a time that might work for you? That's a way to end a conversation in a direct and polite way. Practicing a conversation beforehand in a mirror or with a friend can be a great way to help prepare too. Practicing your tone and building your confidence. You could consider outlining or writing down what to say first, then practicing in the mirror, recording yourselves talking into the phone. That can help us hear what our tone sounds like and allow us to adjust before the real conversation takes place. Embracing the long pause is, for most people, the most difficult and different of the strategies we've talked about so far. A long pause means silence, and silence during a conversation can feel awkward. We might feel long pauses can mean that the conversation is not going well. But in direct conversations, the long pause is crucial. It allows the other person to gather their thoughts before responding. If you jump in and fill the silence, it can interrupt their think time and can sometimes cause them to lose confidence and shut down. The goal is to keep quiet, don't panic, and don't rush to rescue them from the awkwardness. How long is too long? This is where your intuition comes in. If you're thinking that the pause has gone on longer than a minute and you're pretty sure the other person will not speak, then it might be time to use another one of the strategies we've discussed, like curiosity. Ask a question, then wait again. It's possible, though not likely, that using a combination of questions and long pauses will not get the other person to talk. If a conversation feels stalled, you could suggest having the conversation at a different time. Don't give up on having the conversation, but it's not a conversation if only one person is talking. So see if a different time on a different day might be the answer. Another unfortunate but common reaction that many of you have already brought up to a direct line of questioning is defensiveness. So my boss tells me I roll my eyes during meetings and I respond with, no, I don't. Defenses fly up and they're conversation enders, aren't they? Your best reaction to initial defensiveness is a combination of the long pause and curiosity. The defensiveness might fade when the person you're speaking with realizes you're actually willing to listen. Defensiveness might be their initial, but not their final reaction. Give it time. Try to stick with them. If they don't talk, you can simply state the phrase again. I notice that you roll your eyes during meetings, and I'm wondering if there's something I can do to help empower you to speak up instead when you disagree with an idea or comment. Depending on how defensive the other person becomes, this might be a reason to end the conversation and come up with another approach, because it's nearly impossible to have a conversation with someone who is defensive. Again, you can't control what the other person does and says, so focus on your own words and actions. When a person is unwilling to participate in the conversation, you can suggest having it at a different time. You can invite other colleagues whom the member knows and respects to join the conversation. If that doesn't work, then you'll likely need to follow the procedures set by your organization. This might mean bringing the member site supervisor into the conversation or involving the sponsoring organization. This is what can happen when direct conversations fail, and it's not always our fault when they do. But the strategies we're covering today can help ensure they do work. Joy Baldridge is a writer and speaker who calls the 5 words best used in difficult conversations velvet hammers. These are words that are soft like velvet, but pack a punch to get results. So these are this is the strategy we're going to talk about today to answer the question or the concerns you were mentioning earlier about not knowing what to say. The velvet hammers are the 5th strategy we'll talk about today to help you have a direct conversation. So what are the velvet hammers? They are noticed and wondering, tell me more, and likelihood and when. These are the phrases you can write down right now on a sticky note and put right above your workstation. They're direct, respectful, and they get the job done. The first 2, noticed and wondering, are a great way to start a direct conversation. Literally the first thing you say after you've initially had those pleasantries about when you start the meeting. They sound like, I noticed that you're often late in the morning, and I'm wondering if there's something I can do to help. Or, I noticed that you often roll your eyes during meetings, and I'm wondering if there's a way I can help you feel more empowered to speak up. Then you wait for a response. You might have to wait a while. Remember to embrace the long pause. Tell me more and other questions are great tools for the middle of the conversation. We've talked about maintaining a friendly tone because we're genuinely curious about their responses. The responses to those questions might take the conversation places we did not expect to go. And we'll see that later on in the session when we look at some case studies. But the goal is to maintain flexibility, openness, and curiosity. Be prepared to learn something new. Then to end the conversation, likelihood and when, get to the heart of the issue and allow for the other person to have agency while still being held responsible. They set the expectation. So they sound like, what's the likelihood you'll begin arriving on time starting tomorrow? Or what's the likelihood you'll be able to speak or share your thoughts during the discussion in our next meeting? The when is important because it sets up a timeline wherein you'll know if your direct conversation worked or not. Let's look at a few examples of direct conversations while thinking specifically about the roles of VISTA sponsors and leaders by using some case studies I made up. The characters will be played by some of my friends on the webinar team. Sonia is an imaginary VISTA supervisor who's preparing for a direct conversation. Sonia supervises 8 VISTA members across the state of Washington. Aiden, one of the members Sonia supervisors, has trouble remembering to submit his reports on time. Sonia is hoping a direct conversation will help resolve the issue. Aiden serves at a nearby nonprofit, so Sonia requests a face-to-face meeting. They meet, and Sonia starts by asking Aiden about his weekend. She learns that Aiden went camping and hiking. Next, Sonia moves right toward the conflict by using 2 of the velvet hammers right away. Let's listen in on their conversation.
Hey, Aiden. I've noticed that your reports have come in late 3 months in a row now, and I was wondering if there was a way I could help you figure out a strategy to get them to me on time.
Here's how Aiden responded to Sonia's noticing and wondering. Silence. Either he's caught off guard by the direct line, or he's considering how to respond. or both. So here's Sonia's response to Aidan's silence. Sonia embraces the long pause, even though it feels awkward and uncomfortable. She's allowing time for Aidan to formulate a response to the direct line. How long does Sonia wait? Maybe a full minute, maybe even longer. Maybe Sonia is writing long pause over and over again in her notebook to help remind herself the importance of waiting for the response. Sonia must use her intuition to figure out whether to wait even longer or ask another question. In this case, Aidan talks.
I hate that stuff. I mean, what's the point anyway? Does anyone actually read those things? I don't know, Sonia.
Here again, Sonia will embrace the long pause until Aidan continues. It's almost like he's thinking out loud.
It feels like busy work.
I completely understand. I too have to submit reports on my end, so I get it.
Here, Sonia demonstrates empathy. She knows what it's like to do something that is not exciting and takes a lot of time. Empathy deepens human connection. How will Aidan respond to that empathy?
I guess I didn't realize this was so serious.
He's admitting that he feels a little stressed about this conversation. He's worried he's in trouble. He wants Sonia to like him, but he also hates filling out the reports.
Tell me more.
Here, Sonia uses another velvet hammer while maintaining a serious and friendly tone.
Yeah, I mean, you set up this whole meeting just to talk about the reports? Thought I did something bad.
Submitting reports is part of your responsibility as a Vista member, so it is serious. What's the likelihood you'll be able to submit next month's report on time?
Here, Sonia reiterates the expectation and reminds Aidan that filling out the reports is a part of their work. She also uses the final two velvet hammers to wrap up the conversation, likelihood and when, to move from discussion to solution.
I can do that.
And now we have an agreement to the solution. Sonia concludes the conversation by saying she looks forward to seeing Aidan's report on the 15th of the following month and thanking Aidan for the meeting. Now there's a better chance Aidan will submit his reports on time, but if he doesn't, he won't be surprised when the issue escalates. I'm curious about what you all noticed about this conversation.
All right, so we want to hear from you again, this time using the chat. So we just saw an example of a conversation that went really well. So the question is, what did Sonia do that helped the conversation go so well? We'll put some music on and you can respond. Yeah, lots of great responses here. Several themes that seem to be coming up a lot, using patience and that long pause to give Aidan a chance to get his thoughts together and have a chance to respond. Also, many of you mentioned empathy, compassion, trying to relate, showing that she's kind of in the same situation, they have something in common. And then, the tone of voice, that friendly, curious, open sort of tone that Sonia used. So lots of great ideas. Lisa, what are your thoughts on these examples or ideas?
Yes, excellent. In a nutshell, Sonia used all of the 5 strategies, and it was likely the combination all of them that helped the conversation make it a success. She stated the problem, right? The reports were coming in late, and asked if there was something she could do to help them get them in on time. She used the long pause to give Aiden time to respond and to be honest about what the issue was. She was open to hearing if there were other issues related to getting to the reports in on time, and she responded to Aiden's concerns about the reports being tedious and not mattering. Sonia made sure Aiden understood his responsibility to submit reports and reminded him when they were due. Let's look at two more case study examples, ones that maybe didn't go as well as the conversation between Sonia and Aiden. As you listen to this next conversation, which I won't interrupt, between Alex and a leader and Audrey, a member, notice what strategies the member uses to have the conversation. We also want to notice how the leader responds, since we need to practice both having direct conversations ourselves and being in conversation with someone having a direct conversation with us. These strategies can work for everyone. So look for the evidence of the 5 strategies we've discussed today: face-to-face interactions, being curious, considering tone, embracing the long pause, and using the velvet hammers. After we listen to the conversation, we'll do a waterfall chat, but Andy will explain what that is when we come back together. After lunch one busy day, Alex receives an email from a Vista member asking to set up a Zoom call with her that afternoon. Alex writes back right away and accepts the invitation to the Zoom. When the Zoom call begins, Alex notices that Audrey, the Vista member, looks nervous.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for meeting with me.
Of course.
So I've noticed that you don't typically call on me during our monthly Zoom meetings with the other members. And I was wondering if there was a specific reason or something I should know about why that might be.
Whoa. What now? I mean, what are you talking about?
Well, I've noticed that I often raise my hand or I'll type something in the chat during our Zoom calls, but you don't typically call on me. And I feel like I don't get to share as often as I'd like to. So I was just wondering if there's a reason.
A reason why I don't call on you?
I guess, yeah. I'd really love to participate more often in the calls. And I just noticed you often call on Mike and James and Brian.
I mean, it's not exactly easy to manage those calls. I certainly can't keep track of who's talking when and then lead the session on top of that. I do hope that you're not suggesting that I call on others because they're male and you are female. I definitely remember calling on you before, several times. Okay. I think I get it. You're just hoping I call on you. Is that it?
Yeah, that would be great. Do you think it's likely you'd call on me during the Zoom meeting next month?
Yeah, sure, Audrey. Sure thing. I mean, I have called on you before. But yeah, of course, next month, I'll make sure you get a chance to talk to the whole group.
Thanks so much, Alex. I realize this was probably awkward. I really like working together and I can't wait for our next meetup. I hope I don't hog or ask for the microphone and then say something totally pointless.
No way. You always have such great insights.
Okay, thanks again, Alex. And thanks for being such a great leader of our team.
And that ends their Zoom call.
All right, so we want to get your thoughts on that conversation, and this time going to use what we call a waterfall chat. And what that means is you'll type your answer to the question in the chat window, but you won't submit it until I give a signal. That way, we'll share all of our responses all at once. We have 2 questions. You'll have a little less than a minute to respond to each of them. So again, type your response, but don't hit enter. And then after the time is up, I'll count down to 3 and we'll all press enter at the same time. So the first question is, what went well in this conversation? And your time starts now. Remember, don't hit enter. Remember, we're not yet submitting our answers. We're going to hold them and we'll submit them all at once. All right, so I'm going to count down now. 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and press enter. All right, so quickly skimming these, and a lot of you have responded, so thank you all for that. Many of you talked about some of the particular skills that Audrey used here. She embraced the long pause. She did not get defensive. She used tone and very relaxed, neutral kind of approach. And she framed things in a really positive or a neutral way. So avoiding that defensiveness. So looks like you've identified a few things that Alex did pretty well.
Absolutely. Someone commented that Audrey used the long pauses and it made them uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to listen to even when we're not in the conversation. So imagine when you're in the conversation, how it can often feel, but it really does allow the other person time to think. And sometimes they'll just start thinking out loud. And while Alex did act defensively at the beginning, he kind of came to, and Audrey gave him space to do that.
All right, so we've got one more question for you on that same conversation. So this time, what might Alex consider doing differently next time? So again, we'll give you a little more than a minute or so to respond. And remember, don't hit enter until I give the countdown, all right? All right, hopefully you've had enough chance to come up with some ideas for what Alex could do differently. So I'll count down 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and submit your responses. All right, and they are flying in here. Yeah, and it looks like without even actually reading them all, it looks like there are more of these ideas about what Alex could have done better than we saw the first time around. Some of them are quite long explanations. Yeah, a number of you have mentioned defensiveness. Some of you even go as far as to say he should, you know, apologize and, you know, kind of turn, you know, full 180 degrees. Right, and there are lots of things that that you're suggesting about his tone, about the way he responds. Seems like he's caught off guard a little bit, and you know maybe he could have asked for time to process it, or he could have expressed a little bit of curiosity to learn a little bit more in a way that could have been more welcoming. Yeah, and so, you know, and some of you have some specific ideas for what Alex could do in the meetings where this this issue arose. But in the context of the conversation itself, yeah, many of you are talking about using the velvet hammers and some of the other strategies there. So Lisa, what did you see here? What do you think?
Yeah, I think people are pointing out that these strategies we've been talking about today work when you're planning to have a difficult conversation and also when you find yourself in a difficult conversation, because we are ideally, if you know, on both ends of this sometimes. And so these strategies work both ways, right? He could have used he himself could have taken a pause and really thought about what was happening. He could have used some of the curiosity strategies like tell me more, right? Tell me more is a good way when you're trying to collect your thoughts and you're not sure how to respond yet, or you want to make sure your response is accurate and thought out. It's a way to learn more, obviously, but also get that time to kind of maybe calm down some of those initial defenses and think of how to respond. I remember in the case where my boss told me I was rolling my eyes in the meeting, I felt that after that initial meeting, I hadn't done a good job of responding, and then asked him for another follow-up meeting where I just said, thank you for the feedback. I am going to take this in and consider ways that I can participate in the meetings in a better way. So that's also okay. Sometimes it does take even just coming back to the conversation later, but these strategies work both ways, both when you want to have a direct conversation with someone and or when you find yourself in a difficult conversation with someone else. So before we look at it, our last conversation between a project director and a leader, I do want to touch on something that came up in this conversation that several of you noted in the waterfall chat. In the conversation between Alex and Maureen, we heard Maureen mention 3 colleagues Alex often called on during meetings, and they happened to be all male. Alex responded by asking Maureen if she was raising a concern about gender bias. So it's really common to go into a conversation to talk about one thing and then another thing comes up or a bigger issue gets highlighted. So how do you respond in this situation? You do have options. The first option is to kind of ignore it for the time being, which is what we saw Maureen do. She used the long pause to allow Alex to gather his thoughts and come back to the issue at hand, which was a simple request from Maureen to participate in meetings. After the call, she could take extemporaneous notes and choose to discuss the topic again with Alex if she decides she would like to do that. The other option would be to address Alex's comment immediately and directly. Maureen could say something like, Alex, gender bias is a topic I'd be happy to discuss at another time, but for now, I'm hoping to discuss my participation in meetings. Or, that's an interesting thought, Alex. Is there any way we could hold on to that thought for now and focus on my participation in meetings? It's impossible to know before going into these types of conversations how the other person will react. It's okay if one direct conversation leads to another, but it is helpful to consider one topic at a time so that the conversation can stay focused, and participants will know by the end of the conversation the likelihood that a behavior or an outcome will change. All right, we have one last case study. Over the past 3 months, Jordan, a project director in Montana, has received multiple emails of concern about Maureen, a Vista leader in a rural location. The emails of concern have come from Vista members' Marine support. So after the third email, Jordan decides to reach out to Maureen himself. So he sets up a Zoom meeting with her. Let's see how the conversation goes. As you listen, think about what strategies Jordan can use as the conversation unfolds: a face-to-face interaction, curiosity, tone, the long pause, and the velvet hammers. Noticed, wondering, tell me more, likelihood, and when.
Hey, Maureen. It's so nice to see you again, even if it happens to be on Zoom. But I noticed that it's been a while since I checked in with you, and I'm really wondering just how things are going and if there's any additional support that you might need.
Is there something I should be aware of?
No, not at all. I'm just curious. How are you?
I'm fine.
Tell me more.
I mean, aside from getting really sick last month and my supervisor not really getting that, and also I'm not used to being so far away from a city center. Fine, I'm fine.
We're going to interrupt the conversation so we can have a chance to see what you think should happen next. So at this point in the exchange between Jordan and Maureen, which response do you think Jordan should use next to move the conversation forward? You're going to see a poll open up with some answer choices. So if you would please respond in the poll. Should he use curiosity, a long pause, noticed and wondering, or likelihood and when? So once you make your selection, click the submit button, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right, I'm guessing most of you have had a chance to pick a choice there. If not, here's your last call. And then we'll go ahead and close out on the poll. All right, so thank you for participating in that. We're going to go ahead and reveal the best answer, which you may have already gotten. And of course, the answer that's best here is curiosity. So let's go back to the conversation to hear how Jordan uses curiosity to continue his conversation.
I hear you, Maureen. Does it seem like you're getting the support that you need? Or is there a way that I could either support you better myself or maybe even connect you with others who could?
My Vista members have been really great. I wish I didn't live so far away from them.
I get that. I wonder if there's a way for me to arrange for us to meet up together in the near future. Does that sound like that could be a good idea?
Oh, I'd love that. Even if it's a few months out, just to have something on my calendar to look forward to would really help.
And what's the likelihood that you'd be willing to help me plan something over the course of the next few months?
I'd love that. We could do bi-weekly Zoom calls like this to plan it out.
Great. I'll go ahead and put the next one on the calendar and then I'll send you an invite.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate it.
All right, so to debrief this case study, we're going to use a virtual whiteboard called Mural. I'll briefly review the steps for getting into the site. So to participate, first you'll select the Mural link that's in the chat. And after you select the link, you'll be presented with a welcome window. Select View as a Visitor. It's the option there, kind of below the login. And then on the next screen, you can enter your first name and then again, click View as a Visitor. Once you're in Mural, look for the menu on the left side of the screen. There are a lot of icons there, but we're really going to use just one, the sticky note, which I think is the second from the top of that menu. So click that or select it to add an idea to the board. You can also double click or double tap on the white background, the white part of the whiteboard, and that'll open up a sticky note. You can type your thoughts in that block. It'll let you change the color and you can move your note around if you want to. So if the board is looking crowded, you can scroll to the side or you can scroll up and down to get a little bit more space. We'll give you about a minute here to jot down some ideas. If you run into any trouble, let us know in the chat. And so here's the questions that we want you to answer in the Mural. As before, the first question, what went well in this conversation? And then the other one is, what might Jordan consider doing differently next time? So we'll have both of those questions in the board. Again, we'll give you a minute or so, or maybe a little bit more to answer those, and then we'll come back together. We'll put some music on too. All right, looks like you're all doing a great job here. We've got so many ideas and others of you are looking around, looking for space to add a new idea. In the interest of time, we're gonna ask you to move forward. Next, we want to give you a chance to think about your own situation, maybe an example of a conversation or something going on in your own life or in your work setting that you might want to use direct conversation for. So we want to get you thinking about how you might apply some of these strategies in your own conversations. Here, we've got a second whiteboard activity. You know, as I mentioned, I bet there's a difficult conversation that you know you need to have or you want to have, whether it's with a supervisor, colleague, friend, or family member. And so think about one of those and think about what specific questions or what kind of language would you use for each of the 5 strategies. So in this second whiteboard activity, we've got a new link in the chat there. And the idea here is under each of those 5 strategies to write out an example of how you would phrase it or how you would approach it. You don't necessarily have to do all 5, but there's space there if you want to. So again, we'll let you go and get started. All right, lots of great ideas coming in here. Keep those coming if you still have a couple that you want to add. You know, we don't have time to go through them all, but I'm going to capture these in a document, and we'll share them afterwards when we share the recording to the session. So definitely keep getting your ideas and examples in here, because I think there's some really nice ways, some approaches that you've listed here that others might find helpful. Yeah, Lisa, I'm wondering what you think about their work so far.
Yes, I'm impressed with all the examples you shared and the ways that you're already thinking about how to transfer some of these strategies from, you know, the webinar to your life, which is really the goal, because we can talk about having difficult conversations, but the reality is we need to practice, and it's okay if we're not great at it at first, but it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the better at it you will get. So I'm impressed with all of the examples you shared, and I'm grateful for your participation today. Before we finish the webinar, I want to leave you with a few resources to dive a little deeper into this topic if you're interested. So they're included at the end of the slides as well with some links, but Michelle Stowe's TED Talk called Empathy, the Heart of Difficult Conversations is a good one. She shares 5 questions you can use to have a restorative conversation based in empathy. And I also have a couple of books to recommend. I want to suggest for further study of this topic, you look sort of beyond the typical business resources we often talk about as part of being professionals and at work. But the first book is perhaps an unlikely source for conversation strategies, but I do think it's really great. I always recommend How to Talk to Kids So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk, because guess what? Kids are people. And so these are just some really great strategies for working with anyone. But that's written by Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish. And the second book I love is Do Listen, Understand What's Really Being Said by Babette Buster. So it's been a pleasure here today to be able to talk to you about this topic and to see you participate during the webinar. I'm so grateful for all of your thoughts and ideas. And I hope that the next time you're preparing for a direct conversation with the supervisor, colleague, friend, yes, even family members at work, you'll reflect on these strategies we've talked about today, and you can prepare beforehand to integrate one or more or all of them into your difficult conversation so that it becomes a direct and successful one.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for all those great resources and a really enlightening presentation. I'm going to mention quickly a resource on a different topic that might be of interest to sponsors. It's a new online e-learning course. It's on the Vista campus, and it's about creating a Vista member recruitment plan. The course walks through the 6 stages of member recruitment, and it outlines some approaches to planning that's based on your project's goals, and incorporates other people in the process. You can find the course in the Vista member recruitment learning path on the Vista campus, and the link is in the chat. Want to shift gears here a little bit, ask what you think about this webinar. Every month we ask you this, but your input is really valuable to us. So if you would take 2 minutes, give us your thoughts in our survey. We review all the feedback. I read every single comment, and we incorporate it in how we can improve our presentations going forward. So thank you in advance. And I want to show you, before we sign off, our webinar topic for next month. In fact, the next 3 webinars for sponsors and leaders are going to look at different aspects of member recruitment. In February, we're going to focus on optimizing your member recruitment plan. That'll be on Thursday, February 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern. We hope to see you there. I'd like to thank again our presenter, Lisa Reitmeyer, for sharing with us today. Also, thanks to our instructional designers, Bethany DeSablin, Abby Stafford, and Elizabeth Floyd, and voiceover actor, Eric Powell, and our producers today, Mike Dietz and Tessa. So most of all, thank you for participating. That concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining.